The homeless situation in Los Angeles is the mayor there only adding to it. Bureaucracy always winning. What do we mean by that? And when the clock hit midnight on New Year's Eve, what were your New Year's resolutions? We'll discuss straight ahead on Think America. Hello there, Terry here on Think America, where we reason first and then converse. This is America's Radio Town Hall format. I have the pleasure of bringing real Americans to the microphone and asking them thought-provoking conversation questions where there's really no wrong answer. They let their hair down on very interesting topics, which we bring to you every week here on the program. You can find us at thinkamericaradio.com. You can find me, Terry Talk Radio, on Facebook. And I'd like to introduce Bryson. Bryson joins us. He's a young millennial professional in business and also at some point wants to work in public policy, perhaps in Washington as a lobbyist. Hello, Bryson. Nice to have you.
Hi, Terry. Thanks again for having me here. This is a great opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Good. All right. Very good. We're happy to have you. Martina is with us. Martina is a PhD scientist and a researcher. She works in infectious diseases. Hello, Martina.
Hi, Terry. Nice to be here.
You bet. Thank you for joining us. All right. Let's get right to it here as we log another edition of Think America. If you take a look at the homeless situation in Los Angeles, it appears that the desire to help the homeless has not only hurt them, but also those living closest to them. It's apparent that an outcome of good deeds does not necessarily lead to good results. Where have we heard that before? And the proof is that LA has doubled its homeless budget, and yet the amount of crime committed by the homeless has also doubled. Now, according to some researchers, homeless advocates like to claim that the police wrongly arrest the homeless for quality of life offenses that the non-homeless get a pass on. Now, what do we mean by that? For example, if ordinary people are not arrested for public urination, so say researchers, or for campfires, why should the homeless be arrested? But they don't link up other things that have to do with the homeless problem. So let me start with you, Bryson. Do you agree with this analysis that it has fueled the legalization of homelessness, which has allowed vagrants to urinate, defecate in public, etc., resulting in businesses fleeing those affected areas and even hepatitis outbreaks? Or do you think that by adding more money into the budget for homelessness, it actually helps the situation?
I have to agree with the analysis, Terry, because it seems to me like the whole basis of this is that these people have been dealing with rough times because they're homeless, and so we shouldn't really be punishing them too much because they're really down on their luck. But because these people seem to have that kind of mentality, it really seems like that is only really making them feel good while everything else seems to be paying the price for it. As you mentioned, crime has gone up, then as well as health violations and outbreaks. Businesses are fleeing. Quality of life is ostensibly going down. So it really hasn't been helping, and rarely has ever been throwing more money at a problem really fixed anything. Since they doubled their budget, really only not even 300 people have been lifted out of homelessness. So it really doesn't seem like it's doing any kind of good whatsoever.
It just reminds me of a lot of social programs, a lot of welfare system monies that's thrown at folks, Martina, that are on the dole, so to speak. The more money into the system, as you shovel money into, for example, in this case, homeless services organizations or just food to get to the homeless, the problem is magnified. How is that?
Well, I think by providing more money or budget money to homelessness, what does that money really do? What is its intended effect? And I tried to find that answer. And to your point, it's supposed to go to things like food, outreach programs that are very general, but I haven't seen too many individuals lifted out of homelessness. It seems to encourage the issue. In other words, oh, they're giving out money and food, so I can sit here and camp out in wherever in LA or even in Orange County, they're having a terrible problem in Santa Ana. I was there on a business trip recently. So I think it encourages the spread of the issue. And to your point earlier, also the spread of disease and other problems. So those money should probably be spent, if they're going to spend them, towards helping with mental health issues, because many of these individuals do have mental health issues, and that's why they're out on the streets. Others have problems with drug or alcohol abuse. So I think, to your point, what's this money used for, and is it really helping, or is it encouraging the problem? And I would say it's encouraging a greater population.
I would say it is as well. If you're going to have someone walk up to you as you're sitting on a street corner and hand you food and hand you drink, I don't mean alcohol. I mean something to drink, make you comfortable. If it's in the winter, more blankets, extra little money in your pocket to go down to the Safeway, or whatever it might be, and to stay warm, then, well, why not start a campfire, for example? I mean, that's not illegal for people who aren't homeless, right? If they do it in certain areas. So it's the mentality of just continuing the problem, Bryson. And now we've got certain researchers that have looked at some of these fires in the Los Angeles area. And they're saying some of them have, in fact, now been traced back to illegals who have cooked in homeless camps. There was one researcher that researched it all the way back to the Skirball fire and says, well, you're subsidizing homelessness, and now we have fires.
Yeah, again, because people have been so ramped to just throw money at the problem, all it's done is exacerbated the already horrible effects and made everything a whole lot worse, because not only has quality of life gone down, it's actually a very potential safety risk, because as we've seen with homelessness, fires can get started, and that can pull resources and time and effort to put out those fires, when, as we saw like with Ventura County just recently with all the fires that they had, and then just generally the constant fires we see every single year. So it's not only dangerous to just LA, but it's dangerous to other parts of California as well, and anywhere else where we kind of continue these kinds of policy decisions.
Back to what you were talking about with regard to mental illness. Most folks, social scientists that really study this, will come up with sort of a bottom line answer, Martina. They say, look, most of these people are mentally ill, and yet we don't have the facilities to put them back into mental ill hospitals for the mentally ill. And that this is the bottom line at the top of the page. Sure, there's people that are down on your luck and you're homeless for a while, but maybe you can get a job and get back on your feet. But the bottom line is all of the people on balance that are there need to be in hospitals. I don't see that coming. I don't think that the nation is about to do that, and certainly not the state of California. Do you agree?
I definitely agree. I think that it's all talk. I mean, they talk about the need for not only mental illness facilities, but also treatment for those that are addicted to drugs or alcohol, or some of our veterans that have PTSD. But instead of putting money towards that, they do the Band-Aid approach where, well, we'll just give them food and water and have them camp out on the street, instead of sending some of that money to build a facility or transition some of these hospitals that have closed in Los Angeles into a facility that could house those individuals and get them the help that they need. So again, it's the typical left-wing double talk, in my opinion, that it's, well, let's just put a Band-Aid on the problem. We'll give them stuff. We feel good, but the problem will still continue to exist. And crime will run rampant in these encampments. Not just the public urination or defecation or other issues like that, but also robbery, accosting and assaulting individuals for money to get drugs. All of those things escalate in these types of encampments.
It's interesting that there were some statistics that the minute new politicians get into office in California, for example, mayors in Los Angeles or San Francisco, they actually try to double the budget for homelessness, Bryson. It's that feel good that Martina's talking about. Just caring so much that more money is coming their way, but it's getting worse. And I think if it gets rock bottom, whatever that looks like, it'll just be more and more and more of the descriptions we've been talking about. Politicians will then start to do something, but it's got to get worse before it can get better. And in the meantime, they throw money at it.
Yeah, because generally it seems the modus operandi with the politicians when they come into office is just basically to show the voters and their constituents that, look how caring I am as a politician. I am funneling more money into different social programs and welfare assignments and things like that to try to help people. But I'm not really doing any real good. It doesn't really change anything that's the problems that we're dealing with. It's just mainly one big publicity stunt, more or less.
I was reading, Bryson, where there's upwards, almost, not more than, but almost 60,000 homeless in Los Angeles. And yet Mayor Garcetti continues to subsidize 60,000. That's on bridges. That's underneath bridges. That's in public parks. That's in on the corner next to businesses. This will get a lot worse before it gets better. How many homeless? What's the number you think? 100,000, 150,000 before it gets better?
Honestly, I'm not sure how bad the problem is going to get before people really kind of wake up and see just what really needs to be done. So when you mentioned rock bottom, whatever rock bottom looks like, it's not going to be pretty for LA or any other part of California.
Well, it won't just be the mentally ill, and it won't just be health issues, urination, defecation, and that kind of thing. It will be crime. Don't you agree, Martina?
I agree. It'll be a crime-related issue against not only business owners, but in Santa Ana, they camp out on the courthouse steps and they wash it down every day. So they ask them to leave. They stay there at night, the homeless population, and then they're asked to leave. So I've seen it in San Diego. I've seen it in Los Angeles. I've seen it in Orange County, throughout San Francisco when I go there on business. And frankly, I don't feel safe. And
I've seen it in Seattle. I've seen it in Portland. I've seen it in Dallas. This is growing and it's becoming almost epidemic. And yet the various different cities or state is dealing with it right now. But it will be an in-your-face issue on a national level if it isn't curbed. These people that are mentally ill, which is the bulk of them, which is why they're homeless, need to be back into hospitals. So there has to be a concerted effort for that. But I don't think we are there yet. Final 30 seconds, Martina, your thought quickly.
I think it's a business issue and that when these conferences start to cancel in these metropolitan areas, they're going to get hit in the pocketbook and have a rethink about this whole homeless situation.
I couldn't agree more. Straight ahead, New Year's resolutions. We can't have a show without talking about some of that and how to stick with them. I'm Terry Gilbert. Be right back. You're listening to Think America. Reason first, then converse. We're back on Think America. When the clock hit midnight for New Year's Day, did you make New Year's resolutions? Some people don't anymore, but younger people do. It's kind of a hip thing to do, and it's a traditional thing to do. Most Americans are quite earnest with their resolutions, and they start out like gangbusters, I think. But then they fail because they either have too many resolutions or they set the bar too high for themselves. And surprisingly, the social scientists tell us that it's not a question of having no discipline. It's more a question of too many tasks to resolve, too many resolutions, in short, and too high the expectations. Bryson, did you make New Year's resolutions? Do you care to share what those are? And what do you think that it's not the lack of discipline, but the expectation is too high and there's just too many on your laundry list?
I didn't really set too many resolutions. My main one was just basically to work out more and just eat a little healthier, just to improve my health and just basically be a little healthier this year than I was last year. And with that, I didn't really set like a goal in mind. Like I want to like have the body of an action hero or something or other like that. I mainly was just in it I want to be healthier, and I want to just change a couple of little things that I've been doing within the past year. So it wasn't necessarily setting the goal too high that I found. It was just more keeping things practical and more real as to what I can definitely accomplish throughout the year.
Realistic. And it sounds like you don't have too many resolutions that makes your head pop.
I mainly didn't want to get bogged down with so many different things that I want to change about myself throughout 2019. I wanted to basically pick one big thing that I can really sink my teeth into. And so I really am going to be focusing on that throughout the year. So not necessarily to get discouraged or get bogged down with all the resolutions that I have. So if I just have one thing that I'm really focusing on, that makes things a lot easier.
I would agree. Life gets in the way, Martina. When we got the laundry list that's too great, we tend to be overwhelmed, and then nothing gets resolved.
Absolutely. I didn't make any resolutions this year. And some years ago, when I was working as a dietitian, I wrote an article about realistic resolutions because people want to eat better or exercise more. And what we found in doing some research is that it's very difficult to change a habit. It takes about 21 days. So when people make these resolutions of always or never, I'm never going to eat chocolate again. I'm never going to eat sugar this year. I'm always going to exercise. It sets the bar too high. They get frustrated. And by Valentine's Day, most people have just thrown their New Year's resolutions out with the New Year's baby. So starting out realistically is best. And you'll notice if you go to the gym or you drive by one, the parking lots are full.
At least for this month. And then by Valentine's Day, the chocolate is off the shelves. Let's talk a little bit about more what I think contemporary resolutions are. Neither of you mentioned the great outdoors, really getting outside, getting off your cadunkus. And the other thing is getting away from social media and putting the cell phone down and trying not to be anxious about it. I am very anxious because I'm so tied to my work and people come at me all the time, all hours of the day. And when I'm sleeping, that I've got that cell phone all the time. But over the Christmas holiday, I was unplugged. And I just decided I am going to resolve that and not ruin my vacation being so tied to work. Bryson, how many people are off their cadunkus, away from screens, out in the great outdoors, trying to just breathe in air and not recycled air that the office gives you, and away from their devices? Do you think that's on the resolution list?
For myself, yeah, I will generally try to stay off like social media or other things like that and really only keep the amount of screen time I'm doing for what I do with work. And yeah, I would like to kind of get out of the digital world a little more and get back into real life in a lot of ways, kind of really spend time with family and friends and really make sure that those strong human connections are still there.
But do you think Americans are resolving to do that?
Some, I think, definitely will, because there's been a lot of discussion with the effects of necessarily remaining within the digital world a little too much and losing those kinds of human connections. So I think some people will definitely try to make a more concerted effort to really...
It's hard to know how many, really. Martina, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think people are resolving to do that, but they're addicted to their devices. And the other issue is personal boundaries, setting those boundaries with other people to respect your time away from your digital device. So while I think there's, to Bryson's point, there are a lot of people that may choose to stay away from social media or the digital world for a little while. It's kind of like Michael Corleone said, they keep pulling me back in. So I think that's another issue that I've seen discussed, at least on social media, is other people respecting boundaries and the person's choice to resolve to get away from social media.
The other thing that I think should be mentioned is New Year's resolutions always remind me of Lent. And Lent always reminds me of a thou shalt not. Thou shalt not have candy. Thou shalt not swear. Thou shalt nots, which reminds me of the Old Testament. Okay. I think we need to do the what can you do? What can you do better? And we'd have better resolves. In Lent, I can be kinder. I don't have to give up chocolate, but let me be kinder. In other words, put it proactively. That would be my approach to New Year's resolutions. And I'll leave you with this. My resolve is I am on time. Not that I'm not going to be on time. I am on time. That is my resolve. I put it in the affirmative. All right. Good segment all. When we come back, great interview ahead on athletes in college and whether or not they should be paid for their efforts. Stick around. I want to turn our attention now to the issue of college athletes being exploited when they go to college and all the demands on them with regard to their sports training and their sports execution. Is there a fair way to pay college athletes for their labor? And what does the NCAA have to say about paying athletes with regard to hurting their education or helping their education? Corey Jackson is a former NFL athlete who played for the Cleveland Browns and the Denver Broncos. He is presently the CEO of Qwerkz, which is a platform that is changing the way athletes do business. Corey, so nice to have you on Think America. Welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure, Terry. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's talk first and foremost. Do you think you were exploited when you were playing sports in college and you were paid as an NFL player? And do you think kids are kids, I'll talk to them as kids because some of them are 17 and 18 when they enter college, are being exploited today at the college level for college athletics?
Yeah, so I always look at things at, a fair value for a value exchange, right? And for us, when we go to college on a scholarship, they're offering us the opportunity to get an education, get a degree. And that's great. I think that's a great opportunity. However, when you look at what's being generated and created off the backs of the athletes, then you have to ask yourself the question, is this a fair value exchange, which I think it's not. For instance, you have a coach at Clemson University making over $2 million a year, right? And that coach is an assistant coach, not a head coach, right? And so you have all of this money being generated, and you're talking about the NCAA and the billion-dollar industry, and I get an education that may be the equivalent of $70,000. Like, that to me is completely unfair. Like, that's no way you should be able to justify that.
All right, you said at the top, value to value. You get a college degree, you get an education and that degree, which has value, and the school gets your athletic prowess and hopefully winning football. All right. Do you think that's a fair value to value? You mentioned the coach, but let's leave him out of it for just a sec.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, absolutely not. And they're getting more than just your athletic prowess. They're getting your image, your likeness, everything that's generated from you as an individual. They own that, right? And so they're getting everything from you, and you get a degree which is relative to the ability to actually go out and get a job. Like, that's not even guaranteed that you're going to get a really good career. That's just something that's saying, hey, this can help you advance further in your professional career, but it doesn't.
But then maybe college athletes shouldn't sign that contract. They maybe said, I'll just play in little scrimmages with the dorm, or my athletic career is over at high school. I'm here to get an education, which can lead to a good job. Maybe they shouldn't sign that.
Well, I think when you look at the opportunity, I think most athletes want to play their sport because they love the sport that they play. And they also want to be able to, at some point, possibly have an opportunity to play as a professional athlete, which is an amazing opportunity to do so. I think when you look at it, because there's no guarantees, I'm putting my body, my time, my energy, being away from my family, all of those things at stake. And I am going to get an education, but when you look at what I'm generating and what from the totality of the situation, what athletes are generating for the NCAA and these universities, it's not even a drop in the bucket.
Well, there's no question, Corey, it's big business and they make a lot of money. How can you play it? How can you pay an assistant coach at Clemson $200 million if it's not big business? However, what do you think would be the fair way then to get value for value? You say that it's not fair. I say it's hard to measure because there's so many variables, and yet there are folks that proffer fair ways of doing this. What would those characteristics be?
Yeah, I think it is a fair way to do it. I think it's not as complicated as people like to think so. I think when you look at what the university is actually making and what they're generating, I think a percentage of that should go to the athletes. And I think you decide on, what that percentage should be based upon the athlete, what they're generating that year, right? And I think that's the simple way to do it. I think that because athletes can't go out and get endorsement deals, they can't do any of those things. And a lot of athletes can't even start a YouTube channel and talk about the sport they play because the NCAA has shut them down. And so they have no freedom to do these things. So I think it's just paying them a percentage of what they're generating, and I think they deserve that.
Well, in your case, you're a former NFL athlete. You played for the Cleveland Browns and the Denver Broncos. So chances are what you did in college was valuable enough to launch you to the NFL. I realize with some guys and gals for that matter, they don't have the breaks depending upon what school they go to. So in your case, you were able to bounce off that tee up in college to get you into the pros.
Yeah, I think it's that situation is few and far in between. I played Division I football and basketball. So I was a starting power forward in the basketball team, and I played football as well. And so for me, that was a unique situation. Most athletes that play and give their time and their energy are not going to go pro. And a lot of times athletes have the ability, the talent, but it's just not enough spots. Like you're only going to have so many that can go. And so I think that because athletes are not necessarily banking on that being the end all, the be all, I think, compensating them in a way that makes sense because they generate just as much revenue as almost just as much revenue as the NFL. Like they're generating so much revenue. They're just not getting paid for it.
I think you're right. I'm not sure it's going to change anytime soon, although I will mention that there is a federal judge that is looking at a case, I believe it's in Oakland, about this very matter. How do you think that's going to pan out?
Yeah, I think that I don't know how that particular case is going to pan out, but I do believe at some point it's going to change and it's going to have to change. It's becoming increasingly more difficult to justify not doing it. And I think that if this case doesn't do it, it'll be another one. And eventually I think it's going to happen. And I think, like I said, over time, it just has to evolve. It has to happen. This has been going on for a very long time. And I think it's getting closer and closer to the time for it to actually come to a resolution.
All right. So you don't think it's fair that top college sports programs can make a fortune, and I got to give it to you, they do. They make a fortune on student athletes and only reward them with a scholarship. I think the other argument can be made that for most of them, not people like you who have gone on to the NFL, but most of them, the scholarship is their reward. Final thoughts?
Yeah, I disagree, and here's why. Right, so my company, Qwerkz, we work with athletes directly, right? Professional athletes, collegiate athletes, former athletes, and right now we're getting an influx of college athletes, student athletes that are going into their last semester of school, and they're contacting us to help them find employment, right? And what that says is the universities themselves are not doing a whole lot. They haven't solved the problem to help them transition into their professional career after college, right?
And that may be because the college placement for careers might be thin and they've put all their eggs in the sports basket anyway, and then they won't be drafted. I understand that. It is an issue for the school as well. We need to leave it there. This is a huge topic. I agree that it is getting the eyeballs of federal judges, and there will be some resolves in certain cases on this in the near future. You're terrific to talk to, Corey. Thank you very much for bringing the topic to our attention. I'm delighted to have put you on the air, and good luck with your business at Qwerkz. He's the CEO of Qwerkz, which is a platform that is changing the way athletes do business. Thank you, Corey. Back with more on Think America with Terry Gilbert. We're back on Think America with Terry Gilbert. Bryson, what did you think of the interview on the athletic prowess of students in college, and they're not paid their due worth or value, as Corey Jackson just said?
It was good to get things from a person who has been in that kind of situation's perspective, but I do feel that the education that student athletes get while they're attending college is a good trade-off for the time that they spend doing their student athlete duties, because it opens up a whole lot of...
Martina, your thoughts?
Yeah, speaking as a college professor, I would agree with what Corey said. Universities do not spend enough time helping with career issues with athletes, and there is quite a bit of an investment of time with the athletes concentrating on their athletic ability rather than scholarship. So I agree.
What is the school for? Is it for academics or is it for sports? I think it comes down to that. This issue isn't leaving. I'm glad we got him on the air. Let's switch gears though, guys. There's an old saying that says the bureaucracy always wins. The bureaucracy always wins. It appears true with corporations and with federal agencies. The EPA, for example, can call a mud hole the waters of the United States. And if they make rules about the mud hole, they are the arbiter of when that law or that rule about the mud hole is broken. Even the president is not immune from agency interpretations. So the agencies themselves, or these bureaucracies at the federal level, create the rules without any public input, without input of a court. When cases go to court, the court goes back to the agency and says, well, you have a regulation on it. Therefore, they're the arbiter and not the court and not the public. Martina, your take.
You know, it's a concept of who regulates the regulators, and it's the regulators that regulate the regulators. Mm-hmm. So that's the definition of bureaucracy. And this happened to a friend of mine that owns a ranch in Colorado. They deemed a water hole out in the backyard as a wetland, and under the auspices of the EPA. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I really feel like they operate on the understanding that they're only accountable to themselves, and so they don't really seem to be bothered by how their actions affect the people around them. They only go by their rules, and they'll play by them when they so choose.
There are several cases on this, which has fueled a growth, explosive growth even, in the power of executive branch agencies to be the judge, the jury, and punishment to those who break their laws. They don't monitor for themselves this large executive branch estate, if you will, with EPA just being one example, but there's other branches of this. They have supreme control. All started kind of back in the Woodrow Wilson administration, but then rulings at the Supreme Court seem to bolster up the largesse of the administrative state. Now, there is a case called Kaiser and Wilkie. It's a veterans benefit case, and it involves a Marine seeking retroactive benefits for his PTSD, and it hinges on the VA's interpretation of one word, and the word is relevant. Whether something was relevant in applicable federal regulations is what this case hinged on. In the man's petition for the Supreme Court review, he submitted 2 questions for the court, and the court agreed to review whether the court should overrule prior cases or not. So it all got into the woods, Bryson. The VA interpreted, for their part, its own regulation in Kaiser that The documents on his PTSD were not relevant to a prior request that he had, and therefore he took it all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, he might win, but it's all this kind of micromanaging of their own offices, their own bureaucracy. And in this case, he could win, he could not win, but it hinges on PTSD treatments and help for this particular vet. How do you look at all of that? Don't you think it's high time that the Supreme Court really take this case and sort of overthrow all these back other cases and be the judge over the administrative state? This
was probably one of the most interesting cases that the Supreme Court has focused on in quite a while, because this one, if they ruled in favor of Kaiser, it could definitely shake up the foundation of how many of the executive bureaucracies function and how they operate, because it takes a lot of the power out of their hands and puts more accountability to oversee them.
Aptly put. Let's hear what Megan has to say. She's the attorney in our ensemble when we come back from the break. Find us at thinkamericaradio.com and subscribe to our podcast. Be right back. We're back on Think America with Megan Porth, who is a contributor on the show. As you know, she's an attorney. She works in contract law, and she sponsors Think America. She's the owner and founder of YourContractShop.com, a virtual law firm providing real results. Megan, nice to have you. Hello.
Thank you, Terry.
Megan, we've been talking about something that's kind of right up your alley, and that is the largesse of the administrative state. All of these federal agencies that become bureaucratic, and they're their own judge and jury. If someone violates one of their own regulations, it's hard to go to a court. It's hard to go to Congress and say, wait a minute, how do I get right with this agency? They can dole out punishment as well. There's a case called Kaiser and Wilkie involving a veteran. He's a Marine seeking retroactive benefits for his PTSD, and it hinges on the VA's interpretation of the word relevant as to whether or not his first request for PTSD medication and treatment was enough. They say no, and so he didn't get treatment. He took it on up to a higher court, and now they're quarreling with all of this at the Supreme Court level. Don't you think the administrative state is way overrun? And I'm talking about many bureaucracies that come together making their own rules and regulations without the public input or without a court to decide.
100%. And I feel so passionately about this topic, Terry, that I wrote a 40-page paper about it in law school, because it is such an issue. We have layer upon layer upon layer of bureaucracy in this country. And this is from the state level, city level, state level, all the way up to the federal level, of individuals who are not elected, who are not accountable to the people, who are making decisions that affect everyday lives. And anyone who's had to deal with the VA, the DMV, you know what we're talking about. And all of this came out of U.S. Supreme Court cases, which allowed what we call legal deference to some of these decisions. So we have the Chevron case, which applied legal deference to federal regulations. And then we have the Auer deference, which provided deference to agencies' own interpretations of their own regulations. So just so that the listeners know, when a court is looking at a decision or a law and determining whether it's constitutional or whether it's just or whether it's plainly erroneous, they have various standards that they look at. And one of the standards that we've always had in this country, which I believe to be unconstitutional, is deference to our legislature. Mm-hmm. I believe that the deference should be to the people, to the individuals, whether it is legal to do this to an individual, not whether we are going to say, well, we're just going to presume that the legislature, and then now inherently their regulatory bodies, are doing the right thing. That's basically the question here. Are these people doing the right thing? We're going to assume, we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And unfortunately, what that means is that we have history now in this country of the individual American being run over and run through by these regulatory agencies, including our legislature, but at least the legislature is accountable to the voters, but by these non-accountable, non-elected individuals who are making rules and regulations that affect us without any kind of opportunity for notice on these rules and regulations, which change with each administration, by the way, Terry, and no opportunity for comment. So
this one Marine case might change that, but I think it's going to take a lot more cases. I know this one is very special and they're looking at it and all of that, but these are huge bureaucracies and there's many of them. So there will need to be more cases, more outcry from the people.
100%, but this is a wonderful start. This deference issue under our and the Seminole Bowles case, which people can go ahead and Google, this is a big deal. If we overturn these two, we'll see a huge change in this country.
Great. All right, let's leave it there. What do you got on tap with, as we end every show, Change Your Life technology that changes millions of people's lives for the better?
Well, we've talked about plastic a lot on the show, as well as we hear about it all the time. It is potentially dangerous. It's expensive. It pollutes our waters. And now we're seeing something come out of the Center for Sustainable Chemical Technologies in the United Kingdom, where they're developing plastic made from sugar and carbon dioxide. The great thing about this versus its polycarbonate alternative, which is the plastic we use now, is that it can actually be strong. It's transparent, just like plastic. It's scratch resistant, but it's also biodegradable. What's really exciting about this, Terry, not only as far as it being biodegradable within the Earth's soil, we can now start using these things in a biocompatible situation where we can use them in implants so that we aren't leaving plastic inside of human bodies, which contain BPA and other industrial chemicals.
Fabulous. That sounds just terrific. And from sugar, nonetheless. So that's a good thing.
My favorite thing.
Megan, have a great Happy New Year to you. Happy New Year to all of America, all of our affiliates. Happy New Year to my two new talkers, Martina and Bryson. I'm Terry Gilbert. Thank you for joining us. Until next time with another edition of Think America, you can find us thinkamericaradio.com. Remember, reason first and then converse. See you next time. The caravan demanding $50,000 each to go home. What's up with that? We'll talk about it on the program. Children's brains on smartphones. A new study claims kids should not be using screens for so long. And my interview with conservatives for conservation and the environment. Straight ahead on Think America in this Happy New Year. Hello there, Terry here on Think America. Welcome to the program. This is America's Radio Town Hall. I'm Terry Gilbert, your host. And this is the show where we invite real people, non-broadcasters, to come to the microphone to let their hair down with me on thought-provoking conversation starters. We do this every week, and you will hear topics that you don't hear in the headlines. We have Martina with us. Martina is in science. She's a doctor in science, a PhD researcher, and a professor. She specializes in infectious diseases. Hello, Martina.
Hello, Terry. Thanks for having me today.
You're welcome. Thank you. And we have Bryson. Bryson is with us also. He's a young business professional, also interested in public policy, and maybe down the road would like to be a lobbyist. Hello, Bryson.
Hi, Terry. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Are we both ready to go? Let's get right to it. I want to start with this issue of those at the border with the Vatican, with the caravan, are listening to the Vatican because the Vatican is on their side saying they should get $50,000 each to go home. Yes, this might be a big surprise, but the Vatican has weighed in on this and says the caravan, each and every one, demands this because now they're there and have to wait for asylum. It's pretty shocking to most Americans, I think, but the Vatican says global agencies should decide whether or not this is a good fee for them to go home, a good price, and yes or no on this. Now that they're here, most caravan members will wait a long time to be processed. This could be 6 months up to 9 months, and most will be turned away because they don't have asylum status in their application. They might have economic status, but not asylum status. So let me start with you, Martina. What is your gut reaction about, first of all, the caravan members demanding $50,000 each to go home, and then the Vatican weighing in on it when it's a U.S. issue?
I think this is extortion. This is ridiculous. And it makes me very angry because I think it would just encourage people to come to the border because they would know that they would be able to extort money out of the United States or whoever decides to pay this. I mean, if the Vatican is so keen on paying everyone $50,000, they have enough money in their own coffers to do so. And I think if they decided to provide these individuals with $50,000 apiece to go home, certainly that might lead to the unintended consequence of additional robbery and so forth and additional crime. It's not an international issue. This is an American issue, and the Vatican needs to go back to the Vatican and mind their own business.
You say they have it in their coffers. There are some reports coming out that they might not have that in their coffers just by way of these new reports based on the priest pedophile lawsuits. That's a different matter, of course. But let's go back to the ethical idea about this. What do you think, Bryson, with regard to the Vatican and this price tag associated with the caravans?
Well, I feel it's really ridiculous for anybody to demand that we should be paying this much. I have to agree with Martina that it is extortion in a way because the United States spends an exorbitant amount of money on any form of our immigration policy, from upwards to about $4,000 to $6,000 per immigrant household in the United States. And while I feel that those on Capitol Hill should understand that as any budget, there should be a responsibility with how we're using this money. And I feel that just paying out $50,000 to each of these caravan family members is a gross violation of what we put them in place for. And I also vehemently disagree that the Vatican has any right to be weighing in on this issue and demanding that we should be doing this. This is an American issue. If the migrants had come to the Vatican, then I'd see a reason for them to weigh in, but this is not their place.
It all dovetails into this big wall and migrants coming and sort of pushing their way in and how to escape poverty in some of these countries. And yet the Vatican has a gigantic wall around it, just by way of just a little footnote to all of that. It might be interesting to know that most caravan members are lured to the United States by pro-immigrant lawyers who are in some of these countries in Central America, and they make the case for asylum. So the optics of all these people coming with this intent that they have been prepped up, Martina, to know what to do along the way, how to move through Mexico, for example, up to Tijuana and push on the border there near San Diego. This is all kind of prepped. And now that they're all here, some of these lawyers are continuing to simply say to them, stay the course, ride this out. Now that you're here making this physical claim for asylum, you will be heard because that's U.S. law. It may take a while. So I find it somewhat rich, to say the least, that once their claim comes in front of some kind of immigration patrol, whether it's a border patrol, ICE, a judge, whatever, then when they're turned down, to then automatically demand $50,000 with the Vatican in their hip pocket as a calling card.
Well, and I think it goes back to the old adage of follow the money. It sounds to me like this is very much like trial lawyers pursuing, ambulances. It's sort of akin to that the money would go to the attorneys. And here you have all these individuals that were lured here. They may not know what's going on, but they've been coached on what to say, what to do. And then when it doesn't work out, the attorneys prod them to say, hey, you can get some money from the United States. And as far as this goes as well, why is it just these immigrants? We have illegal immigrants coming in from all over the world to the United States. Would they ask for $50,000 to be sent home? It's
Part of that is that they're prepped by pro-leftists in this country and in those countries working together, attorneys who prep them this way. And this is now the new thing, Bryson, 50,000 per person, because knowing full well you may be turned away. So now ask for this. That's the idea, Bryson.
Yeah. It's really kind of difficult to kind of really deal with this, because when you look at testimonials from the people down from border control agents, and I've really been down there, and I've been and seen the kind of conditions that these people lived in, my heart goes out to a lot of these people that are in these caravans, because they're living in squalid conditions and they're going through all of this. But again, it's not right to demand this, because it sets a bad precedent, as Martina alluded to, with other immigrants that come in through into the country illegally, as Indeed. To how exactly.
Sure. Where is the fairness? I understand. Let's go back, though, and play devil's advocate, Martina. Wouldn't it just be easier to give each family, if this is the case now, $50,000 not to come in the first place? Because by the time you add all of that up versus decades of welfare and other welfare programs, should they all get in, that's actually cheaper.
Well, and that's assuming that your pool of immigrants would stay the same. I think it would encourage more immigrants to come to the border. And then do you pay those, or do you pay people that are intending to leave, let's say, Honduras or El Salvador? I mean, where does it stop? I think once the decision would be made to pay off a group of immigrants, then more and more would come or threaten to come. And then by that time, the national bill continues to increase. I think paying them at all, it would be a horrible mistake. Something needs to be done, obviously, to shut down that border and to get this under control. But to your point about the attorneys, that's where the money would go, regardless if we paid them now or if we did it later.
Good point. Bryson, oftentimes in the discussion of immigration, there's these segments that are only discussed, like, should we have a wall, or should we call it a border fence, or what about English as a second language? We tend to isolate all of these issues under the broad awning of immigration, because immigration is such an omnipresent and huge topic. But since we're talking about the wall in a sense these days, with now this new Congress, especially the Democrats in the House of Representatives, and they're talking about an effective border of some kind, President Trump has put on the line $5 billion, and they're banding about that number. But in 10 years' time, if he gets his $5 billion, in 10 years' time, that would actually save the taxpayer almost $65 billion in 10 years. I looked up the numbers on this, which would be way more beneficial than all the welfare programs, all of the education for kids that are illegals. In other words, it would pay for itself in spades. How do you feel about that? And do you think that the president will get the $5 billion, even if he compromises in other areas, for example, on the Dreamers?
Well, I think President Trump has the ability to get the $5 billion needed to build the wall. And I do have to agree that the wall would help stem a lot of the problems, because for the last 20 years or so, we've been dealing with different policies for illegal immigration, working to either stem the tide or to try to ease transition for illegal immigrants coming into the country. And we haven't really been seeing much of a return. So hearing that the border wall actually would not only save us money in the long run, but help reverse some of the adverse effects that we've been seeing from illegal immigration, I feel is a much better solution to the problem, rather than going with the same kind of business as usual attitude that we've seen with the last several years in terms of policy when it comes to illegal immigration.
Back to you, Martina, and back to the issue of the Vatican. The Vatican's position is they want a global immigration enforcement system. Now, that could be a pipe dream, but they're putting it out anyway. And that would be the one sort of international authority that takes the authority out of individual nation states' hands to deal with poor immigrants that want to move for a better life. This was brought up over Christmas with the idea of the nativity and Mary and Joseph coming in and there's no room in the inn. In fact, I heard a sermon on this very thing, not so much a global entity, and this is what the Vatican is pushing, but the pastor was alluding to these themes. Do you think a treaty of this kind of magnitude could fly for Greece and Italy and Germany and France and United States and on and on? 1 minute left.
No, I don't think so. This is akin to the UN, and it's just would be more bureaucracy. And who would govern those rules? The Vatican needs to stay out of politics. As somebody that was raised Catholic, I frankly resent the fact that the Pope is getting involved in political matters and should stick with church matters.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do too. I think this is not smart on the part of the Vatican. All right. Good discussion all. Bryson and Martina, thank you for that. Straight ahead, children's brains on smartphones. A new study is warning about the brain cortex being thinned out. We'll explain straight ahead. You're listening to Think America, thinkamericaradio.com for your podcast. I'm Terry Gilbert. Back in a sec. Thank you for joining us on Think America. This is America's Radio Town Hall. I'm Terry Gilbert. Every week we invite real Americans to come on board and share their thoughts on all kinds of thought-provoking conversation starters. And here is one. Children's brains on smartphones. In fact, you could kind of hear it coming when smartphones were put into the hands of very young kids, even preteen kids. New study now claiming that kids who use screens for 7 hours or more every day are showing signs that their brain cortex is actually thinning prematurely, which is what happens in the natural aging process. Wow, there was $300 million in the study. It was through the National Institute of Health. At the time, 4,500 kids were screened, but now they're looking at screening another 11,000 to get more data on this. As a scientist, Martina, I'll start with you. Your initial reaction, is this just fear? Because these cell phones are not going away.
No, the cell phones are not going away, and I agree with the conclusions of the study. There have been many other studies that show similar conclusions, particularly in children, because the way that a child's brain develops, particularly when they're toddlers, is through tactile sensations. So touching things, feeling things that are 3D in nature. And that helps build the neurons in the brain, which causes brain growth. So what we're seeing here is essentially a dumbing down of our children because they have too much screen time. So I know they used to say that about the television, but this has sort of a different effect per this study. And I do believe the conclusions. I think it is dangerous, particularly for young kids.
I think you're right. The writing is already on the wall, but this study is not necessarily, Bryson, waking society up. Some proactive moms and dads, of course, but not society as a whole. In fact, the study also showed that kids cannot give up Wi-Fi first, then junk food, then smoking, then alcohol, and then drugs in that order. In other words, that's their preference. Wi-Fi, junk food, smoking, alcohol, and then drugs. Imagine that.
It's kind of astounding when you put it in that perspective, because kind of seems like to these young kids, Wi-Fi has kind of become their own personal narcotic. They can't really give it up. I think this is kind of stemming from how some parents have kind of used this new avenue of technology, whether that's smartphones or iPads, to use it as a means to kind of babysit their kids, to put them down for a little while, to have them play with it or watch whatever they want on it. And so it's kind of created a bit of dependency on it for the kids. And so I fear that that might be one of the big side effects that come from this new data that we've been seeing from the study, is that kids are too emotionally dependent on the technology.
Bryson, I know you're a young business professional. You don't have children of your own, so my card says on you, and so you might not have a sense about this. But I'll ask you anyway. As a young person who might get married and have kids, what do you think is the age appropriate for iPhone, a iPad? If you had kids of your own, what age would you give them these devices?
Probably I would wait until at the earliest age 12, but more 13 or 14 for when I would start giving them these kinds of things, because I want my kids to grow up and not necessarily have a dependency or too much of a fondness for this kind of technology, because I want them to go out and play and enjoy and have necessarily cognitive experiences that were forming not only for me, but for all of us when we were kids, because I've kind of seen with young people is their preference is more towards the technology as a means of social interaction rather than having a conversation with someone or playing games and stuff like that. So I want my kids to develop these kinds of skills before I hand over something like that to them.
Well, you can always hold back on the data element to a cell phone. They won't like that, especially if their friends have it. Martina, back to you, same question. And what more might you add about deteriorating memory function and slower cognitive abilities with even adults, if you know, since you're in the scientific field?
Yeah, we see similar things with adults, particularly with eye issues. Those have cropped up even sooner in adults as they age because they're looking at a blue screen or even sleep disruption. But with the kids, I would say 12 or 13 would be age appropriate. However, the schools are sort of usurping this where they're using iPads as a teaching tool. And I think there is some merit for that. The key is limiting the time on the device to maybe 2 hours a day and then encouraging other more physical activities the rest of the time. It's also, contributing to obesity as well.
So on that note, Martina, why do you think this study is not awakening society enough on the dangers of the young brain and, for that matter, the adult brain?
Well, I think it goes back to the addiction issue that kids would rather give up. They wouldn't want to give up Wi-Fi. So I think it's become an addictive device, and parents are using it, frankly, as Bryson said, as a babysitter. So they're using it as a way to keep the child occupied and saying, oh, learning is part of it as well. But I've seen infants that have headphones on and they're using devices, and that really creates some issues.
Right. Well, I agree with that. And I'm also concerned about the adult brain in all of this. The adult, we're completely dependent. I know if I set my cell phone in the other room and I don't have it to even go to the grocery store, I feel naked without it. And I'm sure that's the case with both of you. All right, let's wrap it up there. Good discussion, Martina and Bryson. You're listening to Think America, thinkamericaradio.com to find our podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Terry Talk Radio. We'd like to hear from you. Back in a sec. We're going to switch gears now and talk with Benji Backer with Conservatives for Conservation and the Environment. As you probably know, last month, Interior Department Secretary Ryan Zinke is now out of the Trump administration. He was dogged by a whole bunch of ethics concerns, and those on the left never liked his mantra, drill, baby, drill. So we're looking right now at who will replace him. There's some names bandied about. And also with the understanding that the environment is not owned by Democrats and tree huggers or folks on the left. Many conservative Republicans love the environment just as much. And so I've invited Benji to the program. He's the American Conservative Coalition Director. It's a nonprofit organization focused on free market, limited government, environmental ideas. Benji Backer, nice to have you on Think America. Hello.
Great to be here.
And Happy New Year to you. You've been in national politics for about 8 years. You spoke at CPAC. You also wrote for CNBC, Town Hall, The Blaze, and others. And you worked for Scott Walker. Scott Walker is a name that's been bandied about. What about him as Interior Secretary?
Yeah, I think he'd be a great choice. He understands where millennials and where younger Americans stand on the environment. And as a conservative, he still understands the importance of preserving the environment. And as governor, made it a priority to protect some of the public lands and spaces for conservation and hunting and fishing. So I think that'd be a great choice. I think he'd be very accessible. I think he'd be somebody that would listen to the American people and constituents and not have his own personal agenda. There are a lot of great candidates that are out there, and I think if they could get somebody like Ryan Zinke, but without the ethics problems, I think they would be doing just fine.
Well, I also think it's important that who's ever on the short list really understands they have to work with this president and not buck this president.
Yeah, well, I think more importantly for this position, I think it needs to be environment first. I think that that's the point of the Department of the Interior is to put the environment first and to look after our lands and wildlife and spaces where we live, but also spaces where we are able to enjoy recreation and where wildlife is able to thrive without human involvement. So I think that's the first priority. And I think, as long as the president chooses someone that will work with him, but also will put the environment first and not, special interests or another sector first, I think that's really key with this position, because conservatives have long been said to be the anti-environment party. And a lot of times we put people at the top in leadership who do kind of have an anti-environmental bend to what they're talking about. And so I think it's really important that we choose somebody who is adamant that the environment comes first, but through conservative ideals, and not enough conservative leaders have done that. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to choose another leader who can.
Do you have, Benji, any other inside baseball as to who's on that short list?
No, there's been a lot less talk about it in the last couple of weeks since the government has shut down, because the DOI and the EPA are very much affected by it. So I wouldn't suspect a huge decision to be made until the government gets back up and running. The secretary kind of left his post yesterday or the day before officially, and we'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks. But I would think that nothing would really happen until the government is back on track. And there are just so many candidates that have been floated, mostly governors or former governors or lieutenant governors. So I think there's a lot of great choices out there. I would prefer, I think, somebody from the West who understands kind of the land management issues that go on there. I think Governor Walker would be a great choice as well, but there's a lot of issues out West that need to be handled, and it'd be good to have somebody with some firsthand experience to oversee it.
Understood. Benji, let's get into sort of a philosophical realm with this discussion now. What is it about Republicans that they've got this reputation that they don't care so much about the environment the way liberal Democrats do or those on the left do? I know you're with a millennial-led team. You feel very strongly that if the GOP needs to prioritize this issue more, they can actually get more points on the board for the environment if they put it front and center. But the GOP has a reputation that this is not priority. How did that come to be, and how to change it?
Yeah, so I think it really started during the Al Gore early 2000s days when the conversation started to really be consumed by climate. And then as a result, Republicans really took an anti-environmental stance just to kind of in spite of Al Gore and his mantra. And I think it's really important for us to not just be anti-left in what we're talking about with the environment. Obviously, we're going to disagree with their ideals, but just because we disagree with their ideals doesn't mean that we can't come up with our own solutions. And I think that's the trap we've fallen into too many times in the last 2-ish decades. And I think really going forward, we need to focus on putting our own solutions out there that are pro-environment. A lot of times we have people that say, just drill, baby, drill, or the environment's fine, let's just keep it as it is, or we could even develop more in public places and just be totally fine. I think that's just a bad approach, because most people on the ground don't feel that way. I mean, 80% of Americans, 80% of conservatives, support national parks and think that they're important to our heritage. And then you have you have a Republican going on TV and saying, national parks is just a big government program and we should just, defund it and open it up for development. And that just does not help anything. And that's the same thing with climate. I mean, you can disagree with climate change or agree with climate change being a problem all you want to, but if you're only anti-left and people believe in it, especially young conservatives, then that's a really bad position to take, is just being anti-left. So I think we've fallen into a trap of being anti-left, and we need to be in the camp of being pro-environment and pro-conservative values, and not just being anti-radical policy.
Oh, right. And you're absolutely right. But I think with all of the issues that are out there in the environment, there needs to be some that are moved forward from the back of the burner, whether it's clean energy or private property rights or wildlife or those terrible fires in California. Maybe that is the PR move that the GOP needs to embrace and get out front with voices like yours. How would you prioritize for the GOP, Benji?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that they need to cover a few key points. Clean energy is one of them, acknowledging that it's important. That doesn't mean that we need to completely phase out the fossil fuel industry, and it's very important to the conservative movement, and it's very important to the economy. But we also need to acknowledge that clean energy is the future, or will be at least a very large part of the future, and has lessened the cost of energy for most Americans across the country. And we also need to start talking about conservation more. We need to be talking about land, wildlife. We need to be talking about hunting and fishing and the importance there, and making sure that is allowed in a reasonable manner. And you're right, forest fires are a huge issue that I think conservatives can champion. How can we make sure that forests are better managed so these forest fires, when they do occur, aren't as serious as they have been over the past few years due to bad forest fire management? Those are all things that are really easy for conservatives to tackle. It doesn't involve getting into the climate change discussion, but it's all pro-environment, and it's they're definitely issues that are within the conservative value set.
One of the things that you do with your organization, which is American Conservation Coalition, is that you're quite active on Capitol Hill with environmental legislation. Tell us a little bit, we got 1 minute left, about what you're doing vis-a-vis legislation for 2019.
Yeah, so we have a lot of activists across the country, young and old, who really feel passionately about this issue on the conservative side. And what we do is we have them reach out to their legislators on this issue, because until our organization was around, there wasn't any organization other than like a Sierra Club or World Wildlife Fund, a leftist organization, to reach out to legislators on this topic. So we're really excited about that, and we've been able to have a pretty strong impact. And it's on those same key issues like you were talking about earlier, conservation, etc.
We need to leave it there, Benji. Good luck to you. Thank you for coming on the program. All the best. He's a young American conservative with the American Conservative Coalition on environmental issues. Have a great day. Thank you for coming on the program, Benji Backer.
Thanks, Terry.
You bet. Straight ahead, more Think America with Terry Gilbert. Stick around. Happy New Year again across the affiliates for Think America. Nice to have you on board. It's 2019. I'm Terry Gilbert here on Think America, where we reason first and then converse. Another topic for my ensemble here, 33 states now allow medical marijuana, including 10 states in D.C. that have taken steps to decriminalize or even go so far to legalize pot for recreational purposes. It's weird in a way, though, because the DEA, while insisting that it supports medical marijuana research, has also resisted calls to reclassify the plant. So here's their situation. It seems like they're stalling or slowing the roll, if you will. They don't want to reclassify the plant so it's not lumped in with addictive drugs like heroin and ecstasy. It means that the DEA is limiting American scientists in their ability to research the medical benefits of marijuana. Martina, being in science and being in research, is the DEA dragging its feet on the whole cannabis issue? Shouldn't they be more proactive, because it seems like it too is here to stay?
Yeah, I think they are dragging their feet a bit. And I think some of the hesitancy comes from addictive compounds such as opioids. So they don't want to introduce another, quote, addictive compound into research. I will say that it is allowable to research components of marijuana. So the oil and other components are certainly, you're able to research that at most institutions. But the plant itself, I think they're trying to keep tighter control of where the plant goes, how it's studied, and recognizing that it's an addictive compound is probably associated with the opioid crisis and how they want to sort of manage the optics of the research, so to speak.
I tend to agree with you, Bryson.
I have to agree as well. I think the DEA doesn't really want too much study done on necessarily an addictive substance, because that can open the room for study on other addictive substances as well. So they're dragging their feet a little bit, but I do think that there is potential medical benefits from researching the compounds, because there's certain compounds that you can find in not only marijuana but in hemp as well that isn't addictive, but there's potential for it to have medical purposes that can help in healing and stuff like that, which if there's a possibility that it could help, I don't think that it's a problem for us to do a bit of research into that. But I do believe that there should be some cooperation between both the medical community and the DEA. And I believe there's some sort of middle ground that we can come to make sure that both parties are happy.
You know, it's interesting, Bryson, that you say that. I tend to agree with what both of you have said. There's a research facility at the University of Mississippi that is, in fact, the only place in the country that is authorized to grow and to test marijuana for medical research purposes. And they don't even get to grow the new stuff. In other words, if they're going to separate that plant separate out of the BD, what is it? The CBD. That's correct. That's the element that doesn't get people high, as opposed to the THC, which is the element that does get them high. If they're going to do that, it strikes me that they need new plants, Martina, and we don't have that.
They do need new plants, and the concentration of those active chemicals varies based on the plant itself, how it's grown. I will say that the University of Mississippi probably has a very secure facility. I mean, after all, they are growing marijuana on a college campus. So I could see how that might be a target for theft or liability. So, you know, realistically, if growing the plants would probably be more of a security issue when you really think about it. And those facilities would have to be approved to do that. But new plants, definitely. New species of plants need to be looked at, because they can crossbreed them and create plants that make more CBD.
Yeah, and then they can study nausea and Parkinson's and anxiety and Crohn's disease and MS. And the big one, Bryson, epilepsy.
Yeah, seeing as how there have been links in what we're seeing with CPD and how that can potentially be helpful to people, I do think that it is a good idea for us to maybe come to some sort of common ground and see how necessarily we can work with each other and how we can best find a good way to study this kind of stuff.
All right, good discussion all. When we come back from the break, we'll hear what Megan has to say. Megan is a contributor on the program, and she sponsors the program for Think America Radio. She'll be with us. She's an attorney. She works in contract law and is the founder and owner of YourContractShop.com. Megan Porth joins us straight ahead. Given her background, it'll be very interesting to hear what she has to say about this one. Stick around. You're listening to Think America. Megan Porth joins us now on Think America. As you know, she is a sponsor and a contributor to Think America Radio. She's an attorney works in contract law and is the founder and owner of yourcontractshop.com. Find her there. Megan, we've been talking about the 33 states that allow medical marijuana, including 10 states and DC that have taken steps to decriminalize it or outright legalize it. And yet the DEA seems to be dragging their heels with marijuana research. Perhaps there's a whole bunch of bureaucracy for that, I would imagine as such. Do you think it's a little on purpose, or what's your take on why they can't seem to get off the dime and research more, especially the stuff that gets people high as opposed to the stuff that might be more productive to health and that doesn't get people high, that has calming effects and anti-inflammatory effects?
Well, I think it's multifaceted, Terry. I don't think it's just the fact that we have a bureaucracy and of course, they want to get their portion, their share. I think it's the history of marijuana criminalization. I think the fact that we started out in the early 1900s criminalizing marijuana in an effort to criminalize Mexican immigrants who were coming in through Texas and Louisiana, which we did the same thing, by the way, with opium in San Francisco for the Chinese immigrants in the early 1900s. And then, of course, we saw what happened in the 1970s with Nixon giving his one last slap in the face to the hippie counterculture and designating marijuana as a Schedule 1, which means it has a high potential for abuse and no medicinal application whatsoever, regardless of the fact that it's been used over the last 5,000 years as medicine. And in fact, prior to the 1900s, all of the Americans in the country had cannabis in many of their tinctures and their medicines. I think has a lot to do with that. The fact that we had this kind of reefer madness perception in this country, because let's be honest, Terry, the demand has to come from the market. We live in a capitalist country, and that is what will push it forward. And that is what's pushing it forward. Our government is always consistently behind on all of these things. So until the people, you, me, and all of our friends and family demand that we start researching this potential life-saving and life-altering medicine, then I don't think that the government, they're going to sit on their hands. They don't want to be the first. They're never the first, Terry. They never jump out there with innovation or technology or being sticking their neck out for their constituents.
I like that you took us through a mini history. I think that's important. And do you think it's more important then, as the DEA gets off the dime, that they study THC, which is the stuff that gets people high, or should they study first CBD, which is the stuff that doesn't get people high, and as I referred to it, the anti-inflammatory or the calming effects for various diseases? Because that's what they're going to aim for, Megan. Right. They're going to look at nausea. They're going to look at epilepsy. That's the big one. But they're also going to look at MS, Crohn's disease, right, Parkinson's. Where will the study go first as we get them off the dime?
Well, looking at the trend, it's going to be towards CBD, and the endocannabinoid system within the human body is a new system that we're just learning. It's not new. It's been around, obviously, since we've been around, but it's new to Western medicine. So we're going to start probably with the safest option, and I'm seeing CBD everywhere, Terry. In fact, I have a number of friends who are involved in mid-level marketing schemes that are selling CBD. So this is going to be, I think, the groundbreaker, and then we'll look into THC, and it's also additional medicinal qualities because it additionally has that endocannabinoid system where those receptors, where it can bind to those receptors and help a number of ailments.
Another little quick point before we have to leave it and change to Change Your Life technology. It's interesting about the Farm Bill and President Trump, because that actually moved to legalize hemp production and sales so that CBD can be looked at. All right, quick comment on that, and then Change Your Life technology with Megan Porth.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever been more proud of President Trump than I have in that moment, Terry. That Farm Bill made my heart so happy. So Change Your Life technology, speaking of people who are in pain, we actually have some really amazing advances in spinal cord injury. As you know, with spinal cord injury, one of the issues is that there are weak connections that remain between the spinal cord and the rest of the body. So what they've done actually out of the New England University of Louisville is they've been able to implant specific electrical currents, electrical receptors within these spinal cord injured patients that have actually allowed them to walk again. There's one parent, Jared Chinook, who could walk the length of a football field with assistance after months of intensive physical therapy and the spinal cord kind of charging, if you will. They're charging the spinal cord with electrical currents. It's amazing.
Fabulous. Thanks for bringing that to our attention and your comments, of course, on medical marijuana research. That's it for Think America. I want to thank Megan again and Martina and Bryson for participating. You can find us at thinkamericaradio.com. Till next time, reason first and then converse. I'm Terry Gilbert.